So today I'll be talking to you about how to price cloud products. And before I go into that, I'll tell you a little bit about my product management journey. So these are some of the companies and organizations I've worked for. But my educational background is in psychology and cognitive science, research statistics, AI, ML, and then I have a master's degree in biochemistry, and I was one course short of a minor in business, so a lot of different varied topics. And then career-wise, I started off my career in systems design and networking, so systems architecture and networking. Went and moved into software engineering, became a freelance consultant for 5 years, doing Fortune 500 projects for some of these companies. And then moved to a financial services startup where I served as an architect and technical product manager. And then my last employment was at SAP, where I finally was the senior director of product and strategy for an all-cloud portfolio of customer experience products, ranging from customer support, so service, sales applications, marketing automation, e-commerce, and so a suite of products that all dovetail together under this customer experience portfolio umbrella. And so I managed two of those portfolios at one point in time. So one was the service portfolio and one was the marketing technology automation portfolio. And so as part of that strategy role, a lot of what I did was what we called commercialization. So taking these products and bringing them to market, so partly go-to-market activities, and also involving pricing and packaging, which I'll talk a lot about today, primarily. And how I describe this role, this product strategy role, was making sure that what is built in the product is what is marketed in the product, is what is sold by the salespeople, is what is demoed by the sales engineers, and that the pricing reflects all of these things, right? So that it's all cohesive, all those stories match. Because the worst thing is to sell a product that doesn't do what you say it does. So it was my job to make sure that didn't happen. So here's what I'll do today. So as a product manager, right, or product strategist, I want to tell you about how pricing and product management are related, right? How pricing falls underneath the product management umbrella, how product managers create value for customers, value selling versus feature selling, different pricing models, and then a methodology for how I price cloud products and how I actually come up with these calculations and come up with the actual price tag. So there's lots of books on startups, and in lots of these books about startups, you'll find things about product market fit. This is like a popular topic, with product managers, and MVP product design falls into there, all of these things. And in lots of these books, pricing is never really talked about a whole lot, other than it fits into this product market fit category, making sure that people will pay for your product, so pay validation. But they don't really often go deep under the covers about how you actually come up with a price, like how do you actually price the product. So I find it's often kind of glossed over-ish. So I wanted to take the opportunity today to dive deeper on that. So to do that, I want to explain my point of view of what product managers actually do, like the real purpose of a product manager. So product managers, those smart scientists over there, create products, right? So they're responsible for the customer research, determining what features go in the product, determining who's going to use the product, and in the end, what I think this all boils down to for me is they create value, right? The product they create has value for their customers and users. So every step a product manager goes through is to determine what value they're going to create, who they're going to create that value for. And so, right, they create this value and it's in the form of a product. Then consumers, customers, users, use that product and unlock the value, right? They receive the value that the product managers put into the product. And then in compensation for that, they pay for the product. And that payment, some amount of that payment, right? So some amount of the value they've received of the product goes back to the product management organization, company, whatever, in the form of a payment. I know it seems really simplistic and, make a product, someone buys it, they pay for it, but I'm looking at this as a value cycle. So the value that comes out of the product goes to the customer, a fraction of that value returns to the organization as a payment, and then that payment allows the product managers to create the next product or iterate on this product and create more value, right? Without that payment part, without the pricing and payment part, the product manager's budget would go dry, right? So this is what I'm calling the value cycle. So, right, just to sum up, right? My definition of a product manager, they deliver products that create disproportionate value for customers. Customers use products to receive the value, and then they pay for the product and return some amount of that value back to the product managers. I use the word disproportionate and some of the value here purposely. So the purpose is, right, the value the product has must be significantly larger than the amount someone pays for it, right? That's how you win in the marketplace. You must be getting more back than what you pay. And so, right, and to each person, to each product, that amount is different, and how you pay is different, which we'll get into later too. But this disproportionate value for me means a lot. So it has to have a lot more value than what the payment is. And then paying back some value, so value less than what they received as a benefit from using the product, goes back to the product managers. And so, right, so the economics of this whole cycle is that the value created and received must be significantly greater than the payment the customer makes for the product. This is like my thesis of pricing. In lots of companies and lots of organizations, pricing isn't often owned, I find, by the product team. I find it's sometimes owned by a marketing team or a finance team or an executive team that may be, multiple groups of executives represent multiple groups. But I believe that for software, the product team should own pricing. And my reason for that is that the product managers, because they're responsible for creating the value of the product, are most in tune with what that value is and who they've created that value for, what the value propositions are, right? All those things that led them to develop this product, they are the most knowledgeable about. And so, again, my thesis is that they know the most about the value they've created. So that's one, right? They understand who they're selling to, who they've targeted, who their users are, why they're choosing to use this product. And so that's the personas and features. And then they're also responsible at some point, right, when there are new features or new products to develop, right? They have to determine what features are they going to invest in, what features may they divest from in the future, like what's worth building and what's its true value, and will someone pay for that value? And so these are all the things that product managers and product teams do. So since pricing is related to recapturing that value they've created for customers, I believe that the value created and the pricing that reflects that value are tightly linked, and the product team is the most knowledgeable team, the most knowledgeable people, to understand that value. So there's many ways to pay, right? It's not just money. So there's time and attention, right? When you use a social media platform, a search engine, you as the user, as the consumer, are not paying them money, but you are paying them with your time and attention. You are finding enough value in that product to spend time using it. Same thing for free apps, games, anything, right, where you're offering your time, you are paying with your time. Data, right? In some cases, you're paying with the activities that you do in that application. They're collecting that information. You're paying with data. You're generating data for them. That is payment. Influence, right? If you're an influencer and a new social media platform pops up and you think there's an audience there for you, or you can grow an audience there, you will go there and bring your influence to try to attract others to that platform. So that is also a form of payment in my perspective. And then obviously money, which is cash transferable equivalents. So this comes back a little later in the presentation, but I want to kind of level set that. So here's an example of feature selling versus value selling versus feature selling. So this is customers don't buy features. As much as people talk about features when they develop products and things like that, customers don't buy features. they buy outcomes that create value for them, right? So if you look here in this little QuickBooks kind of blurb from their website, the first thing you see is get time back, right, for less than $2 a day. And on average, customers save $3,500 in tax savings per year, right? They're not really telling you any features of the product. They're telling you what value you can expect to get by using their product. Save time, and for every $2 per day you spend, right, $700 roughly dollars a year, for every $700 a year you spend, you can expect on average to save $3,500 in your tax bill. So you can get a 5x multiple on your $700, right, of monetary value by using their product is what they're telling you, right? They are not selling you a feature. They're selling you an outcome and value. I'm a big proponent of this. I don't like selling features. Features are just checkboxes that you can compare your competitor against yours, and they might both read similarly, but the way you execute those features, the market you're trying to penetrate, the kinds of users you target, the kinds of scenarios you use those features for, may have more value than what your competitor is doing. So feature by feature, you may not win. But if you, with your overall value proposition and the outcomes your customer can achieve by using your product, you may be a clear winner. So I'm a big believer in value selling. So, right, don't sell features, sell outcomes. And I say don't price features. So you package features, and we'll get to that in a second. So here are some pricing terms. Here's some general kind of pricing terminology. So packaging. So if you think of anything you buy, it comes in a package, right? It doesn't just mean the box. So for software, packaging means it's the bundling of those features into a product offering. So there might be 10 features of a product, and you might slice and dice them 3 different ways for 3 different audiences, and each of those is a package. So you package those features, and how you package them and who they appeal to and you know, things like that will differ with the package. And then there's metrics, so the units that you charge for your product. So, right, you might have per user per month pricing. You might have per API call pricing. And I have a whole list of these later, but you might pay for infrastructure resources, for like cloud infrastructure. So those are all kind of metrics, right? Gigabytes used, compute hours, all these kinds of things. But then packaging, right, is bundling of features into a metric. So here's an example of continuing the same example, right, from QuickBooks. So here, where you see they have these different packages. They have different editions of their product. Each edition packages different features or features differently. And so even still here, they're not exactly telling you what the features are, but they are telling you what you can expect to do with it or achieve with this package, right? So the simple start one, track your income and expenses, capture your receipts. So these lists go way longer, so each of these builds on the next, so right here they all look the same, but if you were to look at the entire list, they differentiate at some point further down the list. But the general idea is these are packages, right? Each geared for a different audience, each with a different price point. So here's some examples of common metrics you'll find in cloud software. So per user, right? For every user you have using your product, you pay a monthly fee or a yearly fee, whatever it may be. But per API call, so these are popular for machine learning type services that like, you know, Amazon, Google, Microsoft has. Credits, so those are things like games where you might buy gems or whatever in an app, like a game type thing. Right, revenue generated, so some e-commerce platforms will charge based on how much revenue you generate through their platform. Number of orders or sales that you complete through their system. Like number of clicks, so this is like for advertising, which are also cloud products, so web-based advertising or mobile-based advertising. Click-through rates, they will charge per X click-throughs. Number of compute hours, storage, bandwidth, these are all infrastructure type metrics. You'll see, again, your popular cloud computing resources, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. So here's what I think are effective packaging and metric strategies, right? So your packaging has to represent the customers using your product. It has to be in their language, right? Those 4 or 5 bundles I showed you for QuickBooks, those map to different types of users who use accounting software, right? So one might be a small business user, one might be a different size business, one might be for someone who has a bookkeeper, one might be like, so there are different packages. Might be for someone who does online invoicing and has a certain kind of service business, but these all map to certain types of user profiles or personas that use the product. And so your packaging has to represent the customers buying the package, or who you're trying to get to buy the package. And the features have to create value for that intended user. So the packaging has to align with your audience. And you can have different packages for different audiences. The metric also has to represent something your customer understands, right? So I guess similar to your question, right? You're buying a service using one metric, but that's not a metric that you want to pass through to your customer. Your customer talks a different language, right? So if I go buy, if I build a product that uses an image recognition service from Amazon, Microsoft, whatever, and they charge me per image analyzed, that might not mean anything to my customer, right? I have to find a way to absorb that cost, and what I'm selling to my customer is, e-commerce listings where I analyze the image for them or something, right? So I would sell it to them per listing as opposed to per picture analyzed or something like that, just an example. But the metric has to represent a unit your customer understands. And then using that metric, they have to be able to predict their billing, right? They have to understand how that metric maps to their bill. So if you're buying if you're running QuickBooks, right, accounting software, and you try to sell your customers compute hours, that doesn't make sense to them. That's not a metric they understand. They don't know, they can't predict their bill. They don't know how many compute hours it takes to run their business. It doesn't make sense to them, right? But what does make sense to them is number of users using their system, or number of invoices created, or things like that, right? So that's, right, the metric has to represent the customer, and they have to be able to predict their bill. So here are some popular pricing models. I have like 4 or 5 of these. So, and I'll give you some examples of how these each work, right? So there's free, 100% free for the consumer, right? So that's things like social networks, search engines, right? When you use Instagram, you don't pay for it. And there's kind of this quote that's come out over the last few years or so, right? If you're not the customer, you're the product. I don't fully agree with that, right? You are actively using that product. You are a user of the product. So you are getting value by using that product. You might not be paying cash for it, but you are paying with time and attention. You are sitting on Instagram X hours a day, or Facebook or whatever, X hours a day, interacting with people, and you are using your time and attention and generating data for them so that then they can find paying customers who want your time and attention, who want to buy your time and attention, and that's advertisers, right? So you are paying with time and attention, they're selling your time and attention to another pool of users, and that's the advertisers. So you are a paying customer of that product. So that's the free model. Then there's the freemium model, right, where some amount of the product is free for you to use, but if you'd like to get some advantage or extra features, or, right, then you pay for features on top of the base usage. So obviously popular with games and such. So I'll use the example of like a Pokemon Go kind of game, right? Only like 5% of their actual user base is a paying customer-ish. I mean, I don't know about that product in particular, but freemium games, it's about 5% are paying customers. The other 95% are players, but they don't pay with cash. But the people that do pay are getting a disproportionate value for their payment, at least from their point of view, right? So they're buying gems or resources or whatever it is that game requires, and they are saving themselves time by not having to play the game as much to achieve those as a non-paying player, as well as the non-paying player is an opponent or a teammate for them to play with or against, right? So the non-paying player is paying with their time and attention, and that time and attention attracts the paying players who then cooperatively play the game with those other players. Without the 95% non-payers, the 5% would likely not pay because there's no game to play. There's no opponents, there's no teammates, right? So that's the idea. So that's freemium. That's one example of a freemium, but in all cases, some amount is free, and you pay for additional features. There's tiered pricing. So this is usually in B2B or productivity type applications, right? So the QuickBooks example I gave is a form of tiered pricing where there's different pricing tiers. And so, right, each tier might have different types of functionality, different prices, different resource limits in lots of cases. The pricing and the packaging and the tier, how the tier is constructed, always reflects the persona using the tier, the customer type using the tier. And often there are price breaks, volume price breaks in larger tiers to attract more value. And then there's finally this pay-as-you-go, pay-per-use model. And some of these, you can find hybrids of a lot of these. These aren't all mutually exclusive. But example of pay-as-you-go, pay-per-use models are things like payment systems, right? Anytime you're a merchant taking a credit card, Stripe, PayPal, anything like that, right? There's a fee, a per-use fee. There's advertising, right? Whenever you place an ad, so click-through, number of click-throughs, things like that. That's pay-as-you-go in some cases. Platform as a service or infrastructure as a service providers, AWS, Google platform, Cloud Platform, Azure, right? A lot of those services are pay-as-you-go, where you only pay for what you use. The metrics are often very granular, right? So you understand what you're paying for. So in the platform as a service kind of case, right, you might pay for, this is where compute hours, bandwidth, storage, that kind of stuff comes in. So these are very granular type metrics. You can often scale up or scale down as needed, right? If you need to use less this month, you pay less. If you need to use more next month, you pay more. And then in lots of cases, depending on your use, if your usage pattern doesn't fit the scale up, scale down scenario very much, you might just be better off doing reserve pricing and buying bulk. So pay-as-you-go isn't always the best answer either. So that's one of the downsides, is it can be more expensive if your costs are predictable or your usage is predictable. When you price, right, there's some things, some basic kind of statistics or numbers you need to understand to price. So one is your customer's willingness to pay. So customers have to be willing to pay to receive the value your product gives. Right? Most people wouldn't pay a penny a click to use a search engine, right? So most customers currently would not be willing to pay to use a search engine, which is why Google's free to use as a search engine, right? So your customer has to be willing to pay. So that's like step one. Step two is, how much are they willing to pay? What's the most they're willing to pay to achieve the value that your product delivers, right? So that's price sensitivity. Right? How much are they willing to pay? And then, what's the ROI? What's the actual return on investment your customer gets by using your product? And when I say investment, this is why I go back to my money isn't the only payment. So, by someone spending an hour a day or on Instagram, what's their return on that investment? What's the value they're gaining by doing that? Right? There is a value they're gaining. They're choosing this activity over others. And they are investing that hour of time and attention, and they are receiving some sort of benefit. So I believe all types of currencies, like all these types of payments, can come down to an ROI calculation of sorts. So it's just a matter of figuring it out, right? And then the value your customer receives should be a multiple of that investment they make, right? And I mentioned earlier, right, disproportionate value. Your product gives disproportionate value and your customer pays a fraction of that value back, right? So I believe there should be at least a 5 to 10x multiple in what they invest, to what they're paying, and the value they receive. Could be more. In some cases it could be less, but I think this is a pretty sweet spot, 5 to 10x. If you go back to my example of the QuickBooks, $2 a day, $700 a month, save $3,500 a year, that's 5x multiple, right? So this is my just general rule of thumb. Here's an example. I'm sticking with QuickBooks because that's where I started, but right. Let's say you're self-employed, so here's a customer willingness to pay, like kind of mathematical example. So say you're self-employed and you bill $100 an hour. You spend 12 hours a week managing your accounting, and there's approximately 4.3 hours. Well, just mathematically, if you took 52 weeks and divided it by 12 months, there's 4.3 hours or 4.3 weeks per month. So on average. So QuickBooks has run studies through user testing and so on and so forth, where they have found that approximately 40 hours per month is saved by their customers by using their product. So, right, if I'm this business owner and I don't use this product, I might spend 51 and a half hours a month on my accounting, invoicing, billing, that kind of activity, right? If I save that 40 hours a month, I now spend 11 and a half hours a month on accounting, right? Let's say of those 40 hours I save, I can actually convert those to now billable hours because I'm not spending that time managing my books and doing invoicing, right? So now I can generate another $2,000 per month in my small business. And so from my ROI point of view, right, if I save $2,000, I generate $2,000 more per month, but I pay a $70 per month subscription to save that time that generates that money. So I'm getting a 2,800% return on investment. 28 times my $70 a month gets me my $2,000 extra revenue, right? So this is one of my examples where time savings converts to money savings, right? So one value proposition, you can find a return on investment. I'm a believer. You can find return on investment and calculate this with almost any of these metrics: time and attention, influence, money, time, any of these things. So just got to figure out how it trickles down the system and how it converts to value for this customer. Here's my methodology, right? So typically in the world, there's two types of pricing scenarios. This works for hard goods too. It's not just software, right? So there's cost plus pricing, which is where you take your fixed costs, you take your cost to generate the product, you add in a minimum margin you're willing to make on that product, so minimum profit margin you're willing to make on that product, right? And that's your cost plus pricing. So for cloud products, I don't think that's the end of the story, right? So for my cost plus pricing, it's your cost of sales. It's what does it take to deliver this product? So it's not marketing, it's not commissions in most cases. It's just what does it cost you to deliver the product? So your hosting costs, any third-party licensing subscription costs, like what you mentioned back there about other services you consume. Your DevOps costs, right? So your human resources who are actually maintaining your infrastructure and upgrading your software and all those sorts of things. And then your support costs, people taking phone calls and so on to actively help your customers when there's a problem. So, which also includes development support costs as well. So it's also fixing bugs in the software and things like that. So that's your cost of sales. That's what it costs you as a provider to deliver your software, your cloud software. Then you bake in a minimum margin, right? So we'll call this the floor price. This is the least I'm willing to sell my product for. Anything below this, it's not profitable enough for me, and it's not worth continuing, right? So that's my floor price. Then, if I tack onto that also a value pricing model, I then have to say from that floor up to some maximum, right? And that maximum is now based on my customer's willingness to pay. What is the most one of my customers will be willing to pay for my product, right? And that becomes the list price. So anywhere between that floor price and that list price, I call the value range. Right? Anywhere you are happy selling your product, almost anywhere in that range. It's above your minimum where you're profitable, and it's below the maximum someone's willing to pay, right? Now keep in mind, somewhere in there's a sweet spot, but the whole reason why I believe in this value range is it gives you the opportunity to run discounts. It gives you the opportunity to volume bulk pricing or volume bulk sales, right? So there's not just one price tag in lots of cases, right? It depends on, right, different packages you sell. You come up with different pricing models. Different types of industries, you might be able to sell your product differently and rebrand it differently for different industries. But you have a range. It gives you flexibility. Anywhere in that range, you're happy to sell. Now, obviously, you're probably happier to sell above the midpoint of that range than below the midpoint of that range. And somewhere in there is definitely a sweet spot. And it's different for every product and every business. But I'm a believer in the value range. it's what translates to that value your customers are getting, right? When I said you need to have a 5 to 10x multiple, your customers get 5 to 10 times. So wherever your product sells within that range is called the selling price, the actual price your customer paid, right? And so my quick definitions, right? So the minimum price, the floor price, the minimum you're willing to sell, the list price, the maximum someone's willing to pay, and then the sale price, the price your customer actually paid. So just to sum up, right? So today I discussed, right, how product managers create value for customers, how customers pay for the value they receive, how you can sell and price that value, and several different pricing models and pricing methodologies for how you come up with a price and determine, right, what's the right price.